Rebecca, 34, and I never thought I'd be suing my own father for $1.8 million. This isn't a random number. It's exactly $250,000 I directly invested in the business, plus $1.55 million in below-market salaries, unpaid overtime, and the value of my contribution to growing the restaurant over the past 12 years. Last night, at his birthday celebration with our entire family gathered in the restaurant I helped finance, my father raised his $400 champagne flute. "A toast to the children who made me proud," he said, looking directly at my siblings Michael and Claire. Not at me. Never at me. The entire restaurant fell silent as he deliberately ignored me, even though I was sitting right across from him. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I simply raised my own glass and said in a clear, steady voice, "And a toast to the father who will receive a letter from my lawyer tomorrow." The silence that followed was deafening. I placed my glass on the table, picked up my purse, and walked out without looking back. This morning at 9:17, he received the summons. At 9:18, my phone started ringing incessantly, but I'm tired of answering calls that only remind me how dispensable I am until they need me again. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt betrayed by family. This is just the beginning of my story. I've always been the responsible daughter. While Claire traveled through Europe, finding herself, and Michael dropped out of one college after another, I was there managing the accounts, taking extra shifts, practically running the family restaurant since I was 22. When Dad had his first heart attack 8 years ago, I was the one he called. Not Michael, who lived just 10 minutes from the hospital, not Claire, who was home that week. I drove 5 hours in the middle of the night to be with him. I spent 3 months rearranging my life to take care of him and the restaurant. "Rebecca, you're my rock," he'd say. "What would I do without you?" What would he do? Apparently transfer 70% of the restaurant shares to my siblings and leave me with just 10%, while keeping 20% for himself. This I only discovered last week after 12 years of building that business. The pattern was always the same. Michael needed money for his latest venture? Dad provided. Claire wanted a downtown apartment? Dad signed the check. But when I asked for a raise after doubling our annual revenue? "Business is tight, Becca. Be patient." An elderly customer who'd been coming to our restaurant for years once told me, "Your family doesn't deserve you, dear." At the time, I smiled politely. Now I realize she was right all along. Why did I put up with it for so long? At first, it was youth and insecurity I wanted to prove my worth. Later, it was the constant promise of future recognition. "When the restaurant is stable," Dad would say. "When we expand," he'd promise. There was always a new milestone to reach before I could receive what I deserved. And I, determined to never be like my irresponsible siblings, kept believing. Every year, Dad would hold a family meeting where we'd discuss the future of the business. Every year, I'd bring up formalizing my role and ownership stake. Every year, he'd say, "Of course, Becca, it's coming. Just need to finalize some details with the accountant." I'd send follow-up emails that went unanswered. I'd draft proposals that were misplaced, but the restaurant needed me, and walking away from my investment and years of work seemed unthinkable. Even knowing I'd never be the favorite, I kept trying. I came in early and left late every day. I memorized every regular customer's name. I created seasonal menus that drew rave reviews. I negotiated supplier contracts that saved the company over $50,000 annually. Over the years, I began keeping copies of important emails, contracts I negotiated, photos of events I organized, receipts of personal expenses for the business not out of distrust, but out of organization. It was a habit I developed to track the restaurant's growth, our memory album, as I called it. I never imagined it would one day be my only protection. I tell you all this not for sympathy, but so you understand. I tried everything. For years. I was the daughter any father would dream of having. And still, it was never enough. About 2 months ago, a customer I hadn't seen in a while came in for dinner. Mrs. Patel, a retired business professor who'd been dining with us since we opened. "Rebecca, you look tired," she said, patting my hand. "Still running this place single-handedly?" I gave my standard cheerful response. "Just doing my part for the family." Mrs. Patel's eyes narrowed. "And what exactly is your part, dear? Owner? Partner? Or just the reliable daughter they don't have to pay properly?" Her bluntness startled me. Nobody had ever been so direct about my position. "I'm the general manager," I replied carefully. "And your siblings? What are their titles?" "Michael is our expansion director and Claire handles creative development." Mrs. Patel nodded slowly. "I see. And who makes the actual decisions? Who handles the finances, the staffing, the day-to-day operations?" I hesitated. "Well, I do." "For how much ownership?" The question hung in the air. I'd never actually discussed my ownership percentage with anyone outside the family. We're still finalizing some details, I said vaguely. Mrs. Patel reached into her purse and handed me a business card. My son-in-law is a business attorney specializing in family enterprises. Call him, just for a consultation. You've built something valuable here, Rebecca. Make sure you're protected. I tucked the card away, thanking her politely but with no real intention of using it. Family businesses were complicated. Everyone knew that. Sometimes fairness took time. That night, as I was closing up, I found myself staring at the wall of memories my father had created near the entrance. Photos of the restaurant's milestones, the grand opening, our first food critic review, the expansion celebration, the feature in Local Eats magazine. I was in the background of every photo, always present, always working, never centered. In some, you could barely see me, just a blur of movement while my father and siblings posed for the camera. Have you ever felt invisible in plain sight? Like you're essential but overlooked? Share your experience in the comments below. When I got home that night, I took out Mrs. Patel's card and placed it on my nightstand. Not to call, just to consider. Just to know I had options. Last Thursday, I arrived early to review some contracts. As general manager, I often used Dad's computer to access administrative files when he wasn't around, a normal, accepted practice between us. He never minded. After all, I handled everything. That morning, I noticed an email open on the screen. Normally, I wouldn't read personal correspondence, but the subject line jumped out at me. Ownership transfer. Final documents. My heart raced. As the de facto CFO, I should have been involved in any major financial decision. I clicked on the email, expecting to see my name CC'd. It wasn't. There it was, in black and white, an ownership transfer dated 3 months ago. The restaurant I'd helped build, that I'd dedicated over a decade of my life to, had been divided up. 40% to Michael, 30% to Claire, 20% to Dad, and 10% to me. 10%. After 12 years. After lending $250,000 of my savings for the expansion money I'd inherited from my grandmother, plus what I'd saved working 3 jobs through college and the restaurant's early years. After turning down 2 job offers with much higher salaries because the family needs you, Becca. I remember sitting in Dad's chair, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the mouse. The email was part of a longer thread, and as I scrolled down, I could see the entire conversation between Dad and my siblings, discussing when they'd tell me. She'll eventually understand, Dad wrote. Rebecca's always been reasonable. Besides, she doesn't have alternatives, she needs the job, and has invested too much time here to leave. It was true. For years, I'd put the restaurant above everything. I hadn't built other professional relationships. I hadn't developed transferable skills. I'd bet everything on the implicit promise that I'd be properly rewarded. She always said family was important, not money, Claire wrote. She won't mind a few percentage points. Michael was the most direct. She already gets a salary. We don't need to split the business equally. She'll always be here anyway. Reasonable. This word haunted me for the rest of the day as I smiled at customers, instructed staff, and pretended my world hadn't just crumbled. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Working late tonight? It was our code for handle the closing. I'd done it hundreds of times before. I typed back no problem automatically, then paused, staring at those 2 words. No problem. That had been my response to everything for years. Need me to cover Claire's shift? No problem. Michael made a costly mistake? No problem. Want me to cancel my vacation to handle a supplier issue? No problem. That night, as the last customers left, I found myself alone in the restaurant my family technically owned, but that I had actually built. I walked through the dining room, touching the tables I'd selected, looking at the walls I'd helped paint, remembering the thousands of customers I'd personally served. For the first time, I let myself feel the full weight of the betrayal. Not just the unfair distribution of shares, but the years of taking my dedication for granted, the casual dismissal of my contributions, the absolute certainty they had that I would accept whatever scraps they offered because I had nowhere else to go. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. On the 3rd day, I called Jenna in tears. They robbed me, Jen. Not just of money or the business, but of years of my life. Jenna didn't hesitate. This is theft, Rebecca. Not just morally, but legally. You invested money in that place. You have contracts. You have rights. It was the first time anyone had validated what I was feeling. This wasn't just family hurt or a misunderstanding. It was betrayal. It was theft. It was something I didn't have to accept. I think you should talk to that lawyer Mrs. Patel recommended, said Jenna. What do you have to lose at this point? I hesitated. Suing my own family? It seemed unthinkable. Becca, Jenna held my hands. They didn't think twice about doing this to you. Why are you thinking so hard about defending yourself? That afternoon, I met David Michaels, a lawyer who listened to my story with an increasingly outraged expression. I showed him the email copies I'd printed, the receipts of my personal investment transfers I'd kept organized for years, the original contracts that promised equal ownership upon certain performance benchmarks I'd exceeded years ago. "You have a solid case," he said finally, impressed with my meticulous documentation. "Actually, I rarely see clients so well prepared. You have enough evidence to establish there was an implied promise of equal ownership, significant capital investment, and extraordinary contribution to business growth. If you want to move forward, I'm willing to represent you." "How long would it take?" I asked, worried about a prolonged legal battle. "Building the full case will take time," he said honestly. "But with this documentation, I can have an initial summons ready in a week. Most of these cases never make it to trial. Families usually prefer to settle quietly to avoid negative publicity, especially in a public-facing business like a restaurant." I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I wasn't fighting alone. The next day, I returned to work as if nothing had changed. Dad greeted me with his usual distracted nod. Michael was late, as always. Claire was excitedly telling everyone about her latest brilliant marketing idea, which I'd actually suggested months ago, and had been dismissed. I smiled and nodded and played my part. But something had shifted inside me. I was no longer the dutiful daughter desperate for approval. I was gathering evidence, building my case, and planning my exit. During my lunch break, I met with David again to go over additional details. "What exactly are you seeking?" he asked. "Equal ownership? Financial compensation? Both?" I took a deep breath. "I want fair recognition of my contribution, both financial and professional. That means equal ownership at minimum, back pay for the salary discrepancy, and formal acknowledgement of my $250,000 investment." David nodded, taking notes. "And if they refuse to settle? Then we go to court," I said, surprising myself with my resolve. "I've spent 12 years being reasonable. Look where that got me." I continued working at the restaurant for another 3 weeks while planning my next move. They were the longest weeks of my life. Every good morning to my father felt like a lie. Every interaction with my siblings was an act. I began noticing things I'd previously ignored. How Claire took credit for ideas that were mine. How Michael approved unnecessary expenses that I would be questioned about. How my father consulted their opinions on decisions affecting areas I managed. For years, I rationalized these behaviors. They need more approval. Dad just wants everyone to feel included. Now I saw the truth. It wasn't inclusion. It was favoritism. It wasn't family. It was exploitation. David spent those weeks gathering more evidence and building the case. He discreetly interviewed some longtime employees who confirmed my essential role in the business. He reviewed the restaurant finances, which I provided as general manager, showing how profitability soared under my management. He even discovered something I didn't know: my father had used my name as collateral on a loan for the expansion, putting me at financial risk without my knowledge. "They haven't just given you less than you deserve," said David. "They've used you as a financial shield. If the business failed, you'd be partially liable for the debts, despite only having 10% ownership." On my last night before making a decision, I went to the restaurant after closing. I walked through the empty space, running my fingers over the tables I'd chosen, looking at the walls I'd helped paint, remembering the thousands of customers I'd personally served. "You built this as much as any of them," said a voice. It was Mario, our head chef of 15 years. I hadn't realized he was still there. "More," I replied softly. "I built more than any of them." Mario nodded. "We all know that, Rebecca. The staff, the regular customers, everyone except your family." That was the final confirmation I needed. It wasn't just my perception. It was reality, and it was time to face it. The next day, I officially hired David as my lawyer. Together, we crafted a plan. First, a formal letter requesting recognition of my real contribution and restructuring of ownership. If that failed, a full legal proceeding. "They'll probably try to settle this quietly," David explained. "No one wants a public family scandal, especially a business that relies on reputation." I also made another difficult decision. I resigned from my position as general manager. I drafted a professional letter, detailing exactly how long I would take to train a replacement and which accounts would need to be transferred. Nothing emotional, nothing accusatory, just facts. But I didn't deliver the letter immediately. David advised me to wait until the summons was delivered. "Don't show your cards too early," he said. "They might try to manipulate you into staying, promise changes, but we need legal commitments, not just words." In the days that followed, an anger I didn't know I had started growing inside me. Years of subtle humiliations, of having my voice ignored, of receiving crumbs while my siblings received feasts. It wasn't just about the money or shares anymore, it was about dignity. 2 days before David was set to file the legal paperwork, Dad sent an invitation for his 65th birthday. A big event at the restaurant with all family and friends. My first reaction was to ignore it, but a part of me, a stronger part, knew I needed to be there. Not to cause a scene, I initially thought, but to take a stand one last time. David and I discussed the timing. This could actually work in our favor, he said. If you want to make a statement, doing it publicly will give them less room to manipulate the narrative afterward. I received messages from Michael and Claire asking if I would attend. I politely confirmed my attendance, giving no hint of what was coming. Part of me still planned to keep everything civil and discreet, but as the day progressed, I realized civility had been my strategy for 12 years, and it had gotten me nowhere. I carefully chose an elegant black dress, flawless makeup, and the high heels I rarely wore to work. I wasn't going as the reliable daughter or the efficient manager. I was going as Rebecca, a woman who finally understood her own worth. I arrived exactly on time, not early, to help set up as I usually would. The restaurant was beautifully decorated for Dad's 65th birthday. I smiled politely at the guests, many of whom I knew well after years of serving them. I hugged my aunts and uncles, chatted with old family friends, and kept a calculated distance from my siblings. "Rebecca, you look stunning," my Aunt Susan said, genuinely surprised. I always dressed for practicality, not to impress. "Thank you, Aunt Susan." I decided it was time for a change. Dad saw me, but barely nodded before turning his attention back to Claire, who was telling some exaggerated story about her latest revolutionary idea for the restaurant, an idea I had suggested 2 years ago that was rejected. During dinner, I sat quietly, observing the dynamics I had once accepted as normal. Dad effusively praising every small contribution from my siblings taking credit for successes I had orchestrated. The complete invisibility of my presence, except when some practical detail needed handling. Then came the toast. Dad, slightly drunk and fully in his element as the adored patriarch, stood up and raised his glass. "I want to thank everyone for being here on this special night," he began. "But mostly I want to thank my children, who've made me the proudest man in the world." His eyes moved directly from Michael to Claire as if I wasn't sitting between them. Michael, who's expanding our business into new territories, with my money and connections, and Claire, whose creativity continues to bring freshness to our brand. My ideas, my execution. In that moment, something crystallized inside me. It wasn't just anger, it was clarity. This would be the last time I let myself be made invisible. The polite resignation letter in my purse suddenly seemed inadequate for the moment. 12 years of kindness hadn't brought me respect. Perhaps it was time for a different approach. When he finished his toast, I slowly stood up. The room fell silent, perhaps surprised by me taking up space in this unusual way. "And a toast to the father who will receive a letter from my lawyer tomorrow." My voice didn't waver. My eyes didn't drop. I placed my glass on the table, picked up my purse, and walked out while behind me, chaos began to unfold. My phone started ringing before I even got home. First Claire, then Michael, then Dad, a dozen times each. I turned off the phone and slept deeply for the first time in weeks. The next morning, as arranged, the summons was delivered. At 10:15, Dad showed up at my apartment door, something that hadn't happened in years. "What the hell is this, Rebecca?" he demanded, waving the papers. "Is this some kind of joke?" "No, Dad, it's business. Exactly as you taught me." He entered uninvited, his face red with anger. "After everything I've done for you? This is how you thank me? Everything you've done for me?" I kept my voice calm. "You mean paying me less than I was worth? Or secretly giving the business I built to my siblings? You're overreacting. 10% is generous, considering that—" "Considering what? That I lent $250,000 of my own funds? That I worked 60 hours a week for 12 years? That I turned down offers that would pay double to stay loyal to family?" He seemed momentarily speechless, then tried another approach. "Is that what this is about? Money? I thought family meant more to you. Family means more to me. That's why I expected honesty, respect, and recognition for my work. But apparently, I'm only family when it's convenient. Don't be dramatic, Rebecca. We've always been good to you." "No, Dad. You were good to Michael and Claire. I was just useful." He shook his head, incredulous. "I never thought you, of all people, would do this to me, to our family. And I never thought my family would do this to me. Seems we both underestimated each other." As he was leaving, he turned one last time. "You think I didn't give you more because I didn't value you? I gave you less because I knew you were the only one responsible enough to build something on your own. Michael and Claire need help. You don't." It was a compliment. The justification was so absurd I almost laughed. "So you complimented me by robbing me? Interesting definition of respect, Dad. This won't end well for you," he threatened. "We're 3 against 1. "No," I replied calmly. You're three against the law and evidence. We'll see who wins. In the weeks that followed, the tactics changed. First came anger, then veiled threats, and finally attempts at emotional manipulation. Claire called me crying. Dad is devastated, Becca. He's barely eating. How could you do this to him? Michael tried to play the reason card. Come on, sis. We can work this out as a family. We don't need lawyers. Just tell us what you want. Dad even tried to bring me back, offering 25% ownership and a co-owner title, still less than I deserved, but much more than the original 10%. I see how valuable you are now, he said, his voice artificially gentle. Maybe I was a bit careless in how I expressed that. Before, I would have accepted. I would have been grateful for any recognition, any scrap of appreciation, but that Rebecca no longer existed. Thank you for the offer, I replied politely, but my lawyer has advised me not to discuss the case directly. He's available to negotiate on my behalf. Lawyers? What for? We're family. Yes, we are. And that's why I expected you to treat me fairly without having to resort to this. But here we are. The manipulation attempts continued for 2 weeks. Then, David called me with interesting news. We've gained access to some key financial records, he said. This will take time to fully analyze, but there are some concerning patterns in your father's financial management. Based on the restaurant bank statements you provided as general manager, your father has been regularly withdrawing money and transferring it to personal accounts far more than what was declared as salary or profit distribution. We're talking about almost $600,000 over the last 5 years. Is that legal? It's a gray area if he's the sole proprietor, but once he turned the company into a partnership, even while maintaining majority control, these transactions become highly questionable without other partners' approval, especially considering you invested substantial personal capital. How long will it take to build the full case? I asked. Several months, potentially. But we don't need to wait. This preliminary evidence is strong enough to push for a settlement. Family businesses rarely want these kinds of financial practices examined in court. A week later, I received a formal offer through my lawyer. 33% ownership, equal to my siblings, with Dad retaining 1% as symbolic president. It also included a retroactive payment of $350,000 in undistributed profits. David called me immediately. It's a good offer, Rebecca. Better than we'd likely get after months in court. I thought, long and hard. It wasn't just about money or percentages. It was about respect, recognition, and value. No, I finally answered. I want 40%, and I want it formally recorded that I contributed $250,000 of the initial expansion capital. And I want this signed and publicly acknowledged at the next family gathering. David hesitated. Are you sure? They might refuse. I'm sure. I'm not being greedy, I'm asking for what's fair. If they refuse, we go to court. And you said yourself we have evidence of possible financial mismanagement. I think they'd prefer to avoid that becoming public. 3 days later, I received a call from Dad. I didn't answer. Instead, he left a voicemail. Rebecca, it's your father. We accept your terms, all of them. Not because we're forced to, but because you're right. You deserve this. I wasn't fair to you. Please call me back. I didn't call back. Instead, I had David finalize all the legal details. I didn't want to be manipulated again by sweet words that would turn into disappointment. David informed me that Dad had initially vehemently protested against the 40%, insisting that 33% was more than fair. It was only when David mentioned we might request a full audit of the restaurant's finances for the past 10 years as part of the legal process that Dad changed his mind. Your father has some financial skeletons in the closet, David explained. Nothing necessarily criminal, but certainly embarrassing and potentially damaging to the business if made public. A week later, I received an invitation for a family dinner at the restaurant. Part of me wanted to decline, but David advised me to go. This was where we would sign the final documents. When I arrived, I found only Dad sitting alone at a table in the back. The restaurant was closed to customers. Where are Michael and Claire? I asked, keeping my guard up. I asked them not to come. I wanted to speak with you alone first. I sat down, maintaining emotional distance. Rebecca, he began, suddenly looking older and smaller than I remembered. I prepared a speech, but I'll simply tell the truth. I was wrong, terribly wrong with you for years. I remained silent, waiting. I always trusted you would be there. I always knew you were capable, responsible, strong, and because of that, I think I started taking you for granted, thinking you didn't need the same support, the same praise, the same rewards as your siblings. He pushed a folder toward me. Here's everything you asked for. 40% ownership, acknowledgement of your financial contribution, everything. But I want you to know this isn't just because you legally forced us. It's because it's right. I flipped through the documents, checking every detail as David had instructed me. This doesn't fix everything, I finally replied. You know that, right? He nodded slowly. I know, but I hope it's a start. Why 10%? I asked directly. After everything I did, why give me only 10%? He sighed deeply. At first, when we structured the company, I planned to divide equally. But then Michael started having financial problems, and Claire needed security. I convinced myself you'd be fine with less because you were strong and capable. The truth is, I took advantage of your loyalty. I knew you wouldn't leave, no matter what. So you exploited me because you knew you could. I translated coldly. Yes, he admitted to my surprise. And because it was easier than saying no to your siblings. They make scenes. They demand. They threaten to leave. You just accept and keep working. I was a coward, Rebecca, and a terrible father to you. The admission stunned me. I'd expected more manipulation, more justifications, not this raw honesty. I've been unfair to you for years, he continued. I've taken your dedication for granted. I've rewarded your siblings for doing half of what you do routinely. And when you finally stood up for yourself, my first instinct was to be angry at you, not ashamed of myself. I felt tears threatening but held them back. You're only saying this because I forced your hand legally. No, he said firmly. I'm saying it because seeing you walk out that night, hearing the truth in your words, it finally made me see what I've been doing. The legal action just gave me no choice but to face it. He reached for my hand, but I pulled back slightly. He nodded, understanding. I don't expect forgiveness, Rebecca. But I want you to know that I am proud of you. I always have been. I just didn't know how to show it to the child who never seemed to need my approval. Everyone needs approval, Dad. Everyone needs recognition. I wasn't stronger because I didn't need it. I was just better at hiding how much it hurt when I didn't get it. The next day, we held a formal signing with Michael and Claire present. They were subdued, avoiding my eyes at first. Then, as Dad made a short speech acknowledging my contributions and investment, their expressions changed from resentment to something else, perhaps shame, perhaps realization. The 40% ownership was officially recorded, along with my initial $250,000 investment. When the papers were signed, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Michael broke it first. I didn't realize about the money you invested, about how much you were really doing. Yes, you did, I replied quietly. You just didn't want to know. It was easier that way. Claire's reaction was more emotional. This is ridiculous. You're tearing apart our family over money. Dad's being generous, giving you 40% when 33% would have been perfectly fair. This isn't about money, Claire, I said calmly. It's about recognition. It's about fairness. It's about 12 years of being dismissed and undervalued. You got 30% for what exactly? I'm his daughter, too, she snapped. Yes, you are. And that's exactly my point. We're all his children. But only some of us were treated as valuable. Claire stormed out. Michael lingered, looking conflicted. What happens now? He asked. Now we learn to be business partners, not just siblings, I replied. That means accountability, transparency, and mutual respect. I'm not your employee anymore, Michael. I'm your equal. Over the following weeks, Claire continued to be hostile, making snide comments whenever we had to interact and trying to turn staff against me. Rebecca thinks she's so special now, I overheard her telling one of the servers. Too good to help out like before. Michael's response was more complex. Sometimes he'd be conciliatory, other times defensive. You know, I worked hard too, he said during one meeting. Maybe not in the ways you did, but I brought in new ideas, new connections. I never said you didn't contribute, Michael, I responded. I just said my contribution wasn't properly valued. There's a difference. Dad tried to mediate, but years of enabling my siblings had left him with little authority to change the dynamics now. Give them time, he advised. This is a big adjustment for everyone. I've given them 12 years, I replied. I don't have much more time to give. The transition wasn't easy. I continued working at the restaurant but established clear boundaries. I no longer came in early to handle others' responsibilities. I no longer stayed late to fix problems I hadn't created. I trained 2 assistant managers to take over some of my duties, creating a more sustainable structure. My first real test came when Claire proposed an expensive rebranding that made no financial sense. In the past, I would have worked behind the scenes to minimize the damage. This time, I spoke up directly in the meeting. I can't support this proposal, I said firmly. The ROI projections are unrealistic, and we'd be cannibalizing our established customer base. I recommend we table this until we have more market research. Claire looked shocked. Dad looked nervous. Michael, surprisingly, backed me up. Rebecca's right, he said. The numbers don't add up. Let's revisit this later. That night, Claire cornered me in my office. What was that about? You made me look stupid in front of everyone. No, Claire, I gave my professional opinion on a business proposal. That's what partners do. You've changed, she accused. You're not the same since this whole lawsuit thing. You're right, I agreed. I've changed. I'm not going to pretend bad ideas are good anymore just to spare feelings. That doesn't help anyone, not the business, not you, not me. 6 months have passed since that night at the restaurant. Much has changed. I now work as a restaurant consultant, using my experience to help other family businesses thrive and establish fair structures from the start. I still hold my 40% in the family restaurant, but I rarely show up there. I've hired a representative to attend board meetings on my behalf and protect my interests. The transition wasn't easy. Michael and Claire initially accused me of destroying the family and tried to turn the staff against me. But when the details of the finances came to light, including how much money I had actually invested and how my father had manipulated the numbers for years, the resistance faded. Truth has an undeniable power. My relationship with my family is different. Not broken, but transformed. I've established clear boundaries. I no longer answer 3 a.m. calls about problems they could solve themselves. I no longer accept being everyone's solution while receiving crumbs of recognition. Dad calls me once a week now. Our conversations are sometimes awkward, but honest. He's learning to see me as I really am, not just as the reliable daughter who will always be there regardless of how she's treated. Michael and Claire are still adjusting to the new dynamics. It's strange for them not to have unlimited access to my time, energy, and solutions anymore. But slowly, they're learning to respect me as an equal. Last week, I received an email that made me smile. It was from Mrs. Patel, the customer who had given me her son-in-law's card months ago. "I saw your name change on the company documentation," she wrote. "Finally got the recognition you deserved. I'm proud of you. The biggest lesson I've learned, your worth isn't determined by how your family sees you. And true love, whether familial or not, never asks you to diminish yourself so others can shine." For all of you watching who have ever felt invisible, exploited, or undervalued by the people who should value you, most know this. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. Demanding respect isn't ingratitude. And sometimes the most loving act of self-care is simply saying, "No, this isn't enough for me." It's never too late to rewrite the terms of your own worth. Where are you watching from today? If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe. And remember, family should lift you up, not hold you down. You deserve recognition, appreciation, and fair treatment. Don't settle for less.